Hi everyone, so welcome to my session on Master Data Services. So I hope you all had a good morning with the keynote, very exciting. But today we're going to talk about something different, a bit more old school. It's been around since 2008, so we'll talk about that. So we're going to talk about it from the ground up. So MDS is the acronym for Master Data Services, and we're going to look at how we can let our users maintain their data. If you do have a cell phone, please kindly put it on silent or do not disturb or power off. If you do need to take a call, feel free to just duck out the back of the room and take the call. So it's really good that you're here today attending PASS Summit, so you're obviously aware of PASS. If you're not already aware of all the other things that PASS has to offer the community. So these are some of the other learning experiences that you can have, both in person and virtual. So you've got your 24 hours of PASS, which is 24-hour back-to-back webinars on a series of different tracks. You've got your SQL Saturdays. Those are full 3-day training events run by volunteers, and they're very great to go to. I go to them all around the world, and I love them. We've got the PASS Marathons, which are different tracks, again, back-to-back webinar-style sessions, and then, of course, your local chapters in your area or in a neighbouring area near you. Cool. And don't forget, if you do have time and do want to, volunteer, help out. Join the community from the volunteer perspective. It's lots of fun. You get to meet lots of people. A little bit about me. Welcome. My name is Heidi Hasting. I am a business intelligence professional, formerly a software developer. I do work for the South Australian state government, but I'm not representing them here today, so all opinions are my own, and I'm on holiday. So don't take it against them. Is there anyone in the room that is a software developer by chance? Yeah? Have we got like DBAs or BI professionals? Oh, great. Awesome. Lots. There's like 70% of the room is DBA, BI professionals, so that's great. And for everyone else in the room, don't worry, you're still welcome. I am an ALM, DLM enthusiast, which is Application Lifecycle Management, Database Lifecycle Management, and I'm a regular attendee at tech events all over the world. Don't forget to fill in your session evals. You have until the 15th, which is next Friday, I believe. Do fill them in. It gives both the speakers the feedback so that we can improve, but it also gives you the opportunity to win prizes, and it gives the event organisers the opportunity to improve as well. So please just spend a little bit of time, jump on the app, jump on the website, scan the QR codes around the different rooms. Do it in transit. That's what I usually do between sessions, and fill in that eval. Don't worry, good feedback, bad feedback, it's perfectly fine. All feedback welcome. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about Master Data Services. We're going to go through what it is. We're going to look at the business needed addresses, because for those of you who aren't aware, Master Data Services is a technical solution. It's part of the SQL Server product. So of course a technical solution needs a business problem to solve. A technical solution on its own is just a piece of tech. We're also going to look at creating our first business intelligence solution, because our first MDS solution, because I wanted to make sure that whilst you see the product, you see the business problem it solves, you can actually take away how you can go and create it for yourself, rather than just see a bunch of slides. So we're going to go through how we're going to create our first MDS solution. Once we have that, we're going to look at what data quality things we can put in place to make sure that we have better data quality. We're going to look at the governance benefits, because who doesn't love to audit data changes and find out who made a change, when they made a change, and why they made a change. The why being a little bit optional in this case. And we're going to look at how we can integrate it in, because Master Data Services is just a product on its own. We need to integrate it with other areas of our business and our technical solutions to achieve an end-to-end for our business. So what is MDS? MDS is Master Data Services. It's part of the SQL Server family. Unfortunately, it is only part of the enterprise SKU. So for those of you running lower SKUs, it's not in those. It's been in SQL Server since 2008 R2. It is an on-prem only solution. And it still exists in 2019, although it hasn't had many changes. I think it's only one change. But it's still there. It's still there. Unfortunately, there's no PaaS equivalent that I'm aware of. So for those of you needing a master data management solution in the cloud, you could put this in IaaS, and some people do, but it's more for on-prem. So like I said, part of SQL Server, but what it's there for is master data management. So it's that centralized management of data. It provides versioning of that data, and it also provides governance. So if you think about it in terms of, I like to call Master Data Services a glorified version spreadsheet, because a spreadsheet on its own has no versioning, and MDS gives you versioning right down to the data cell level. So I can see who made a change, where they made a change to any of my data. I can link up different data sets to say this master data set is linked to this other one. And it provides a number of different interfaces. So good so far? Cool, yeah. If you have questions, feel free to raise your hand. If I say an acronym you're not aware of, just ask. I can run through it. So the MDS architecture is a 3-tier architecture. It has a SQL Server database backend. It has a WCF web service middle tier. And then it has 2 UIs. So it has a web UI and it also has an Excel add-in. Only catch is Internet Explorer only due to Silverlight. The one change they made in 2019, HTML. So they removed the dependency on Silverlight and added the HTML compatibility. So if you're looking to avoid Silverlight, 2019. I haven't played with it myself, but I'm sure it's equally as fun. The other thing to be aware of on this slide when we talk about integration later on is the 2 little squares either side of the database that talk about subscription views and staging tables. Under the hood, that's just a T-SQL view and a table, but those are important when we look at integrating with the solution. So what is the business need that MDS addresses? Lots of them. So the first one is where you've got disparate data across varying systems. So think about you have customers and you put them in your customer relationship management system, then you might put them in your ordering system, then you might put them in a whole nother contract management system. That's 3 separate ways you're managing the one piece of data. What's the chances that you're reporting off those to say, who are my customers, is going to be consistent? Maybe, but highly unlikely. So then what you want to do is take that data and centralize it and create a central view of your data, but still allow it to be consistent across all those platforms. So MDS is mastering that data. It's taking that data into a master set. And you can do that twofold, because you don't necessarily want your disparate systems to not run on their own. There may be a reason they run on their own, but there may also be a reason you need to consolidate in. So you can create a central source of truth from those. You can take your disparate data sources, bring them into MDS as one, deduplicate the data, create a master list, and then use it for other reporting services. Or you can go the other way, and you can use master data services as your entry point. You create your master list of data in there, and then you feed it out to those other disparate systems. So you're managing it once, but leveraging it multiple. So it depends on your business as to whether you can introduce it at the start of the pipe or at the end of the pipe. So chart of accounts is another common one. People send out spreadsheets, go, here's my chart of accounts. Another spreadsheet goes out. That's great. How do you keep all those spreadsheets consistent across your organization? Yes, you can put a spreadsheet in OneDrive and get versioning, but you're getting versioning for that entire file, whereas MDS is giving you versioning for the data itself. So the other thing we want to talk about is data sprawl. Data sprawl is where you have a number of spreadsheets going around that contain your data. It's going around your organization. It might even be sent to external vendors. You've got no way to know who created that data, when they created it, what they created it for. It just gets sent around the organization, and then someone grabs it, creates a report off it, and you go, uh-oh. Where did that come from? What is it? What are the changes over time? Master Data Services is there to solve that. Creates that central management piece, that versioning, that governance. Consistent data, and of course reporting and data warehouse. So it helps you with that conforming of data. So let's say we had cost center codes, and we want to categorize those cost center codes to business alignment. So we might want to say these 5 cost center codes are this organizational unit. We can use MDS to store all our cost center codes and then say have our finance department go through and categorize them. And that creates that master data set. Yeah. And then we can go in and change those categories and go, actually, that cost center just got merged into another one. Let's update the category, and then that update is applied, and we can see those changes over time. But it means we can do that data conforming in a solution before it hits our warehouse. So someone said to me once in a session, they said, why would I use MDS if I can just use an ETL? Totally agree with them, you can. However, where MDS helps is where you need human intervention to map and conform your data. So if you require a human to jump in the middle and conform the data for you because you can't automate that, there's no algorithm that you can tell a computer to apply, MDS allows a human to come in, go into the interface, map the data, and then leverage and use that out. Yeah. Cool. Of course, product to manage master data. So we're going to go ahead and create our first MDS solution. Okay, everyone ready for this? Yeah, good. So I'm just going to let you take in this lovely Excel spreadsheet of a chart of accounts. So in that, we're looking at, we have a name, we have a code. Something master data needs is a unique code. For every data set that goes into MDS, there has to be a unique code. Don't worry, if your organization doesn't have a unique code, MDS can generate one for you, but it means then you have to make sure you're looking at the right codes when you're updating your data. So here we've got name and code, and then you'll notice those last 4 columns seem to have a lot of repeated values. So they're great candidates for lookup lists and reference and master data, because you want to keep those lookup values consistent. You'll notice in there, I think it's the 4th column and the last column, accounts receivable is spelt differently. One has an uppercase R, one has a lowercase r. That might work for some people, but rather than have that sort of problem, we can make sure in our master data that we have consistent data and repeat that throughout. So instead of someone retyping the wrong value in a column, they're just picking the value from another list. So first we need to break it down. When you break down a data set for an MDS solution, you need to first create a model. A model is the most parent container that MDS can work with. You can have many models, but that's where you need to start, is what is the model, what is the highest level container for my data? So in this case, I might say it's finance. Sorry, this one is product. The next one we actually do is finance. And in product, we then want to have entities. You can have one or more entities. So here you'll have a product and you'll have a subcategory. And you notice it looks kind of like a Venn diagram where there's an overlap in the middle. That's because we can share across entities. We can have attributes that are repeated in another entity. The other thing we have is attributes. That's sort of like your columns that you had. And an attribute can have 2 types. Free form. Now, free form is something like text, decimal or number, date time, or a link. Now, when you look at things like decimal and date time, you can specify an input mask and a format. So for decimal, you can specify the number of decimal points and then how you want that to display when it's negative versus positive, if you want a hyphen or if you want brackets. Or when it's the case of a date time, you can say, I want the format to be, say, ISO 103, which is DD/MM/YYYY. And you can specify different formats that suit your business. The other one is domain. Domain is considered something like lookup list repeatable values. So in this example, even though product and subcategory both have name and code, in product, the name and code from subcategory is actually a domain link. It's a domain-based attribute because we're taking the value from one attribute and sourcing it from a whole nother entity. Think of it like a lookup list, like a VLOOKUP in Excel. Cool. Another way to think about how to break down your data. For data professionals, this is a much easier way. Model to database, entity to table, attribute to column. So if you think about how you would structure that same spreadsheet in a database structure, and then shift to like the normal form and your repeated data sets, you can start to see how that would translate into an MDS solution. All with me so far? Awesome, yeah?
How do you go about determining when it's more advantageous to have multiple models as opposed to just throwing everything in one model and then having separate entities within that model?
Sure. The question was, how do you determine whether you go with one model or whether you have multiple models, and how you determine the entities within those models? Very much, it depends with the SQL community. But one of the big ones is looking at your security, because security within MDS can go from the model all the way down to a cell within an entity, an attribute within an entity. That's one consideration. The other one is if you want something that I do in my environment, I have a model that stores something like security, which is very much specific people of the organization are maintaining it. That goes in one model and entity. But then you can do something called entity sync, which allows me to copy as a read-only that entity into another model. But in general, containerize it to the point with your business. So a chart of accounts, finance model, because it makes sense that it goes with other financial accounting things. You wouldn't necessarily put, say, your contracts information with your employee FTE information. So those would probably go in separate models. But that's not stopping you. You can put an entity in more than one model. If you need to repeat it but have it read only in one, entity sync. If you need to just have it in both, you can. But yeah, there's many ways to look at it. It probably depends on how you want to use it. But either way, you can still get the data in and out. Cool. All right. So if we go back to our example, we can look now and we can break down that spreadsheet. First, we want to do it as domain-based. The reason we want to look at domain-based attributes first is because those are going to be lookups. We're going to need to create them first so we can leverage them in other entities. Oh, LA mouse. So in this case, I'm going to call it the finance model. We're going to have entities for line item details, account type, debit credit indicator, and chart of accounts type. Okay? And those are just going to have a name and a code. And because I don't have a code for those columns, I'm going to have MDS create the code for me. The other one we're going to look at is the attributes for freeform. So here, the only attributes left is name and code. And we're going to put them in a chart of accounts entity, and we're going to add the other domain-based ones as the other attributes. Okay? Liking it. Cool. So let's quickly talk about the interface, because we're then going to go into that interface and we're going to set this up. We're going to take that spreadsheet and we're going to turn it into an MDS solution. So there's two interfaces. There's the web UI, this is a creaky stage, and there's the Excel add-in. So the web UI interface looks like this. You saw it briefly on an earlier slide, the What is MDS slide. So this interface, you'll notice, is broken down into two sections: data tasks and system administration. Oh, and I do apologize. Is anyone colorblind? Okay, good. I'll use color references. So the data tasks is blue, and the system administration task is green. You'll see them later in the slide deck, so you'll be able to work out if it's green, it's an administrative thing. If it's blue, it's an end user thing. So in this case, this is just the starting entry screen. This is the main tool that I use for MDS. Even though there is the Excel add-in, predominantly when you're doing system administration work, you'll use the browser. If you're doing data entry work and data manipulation, you'll probably want to look to use the Excel one. Yes?
Does that still use Silverlight?
So the question was, does that still use Silverlight? Up until 2019, yes. Yes. Pre-2019, it'll be Internet Explorer. Post-2019, Silverlight. Not Silverlight, HTML5. Yeah. Also another reason why you want to look for the Excel add-in. And it works in multiple versions of Excel as well. So another thing, if we're going to dive in now, that top section has a model, and the reason for that, a model drop-down, the reason for that is because when you want to go do any task, you need to first pick the model you're going to work with. And you can only see in the drop-down the items that you have access to. So you can apply security that stops users getting into a model that they shouldn't. It's not like a universal bucket of data. So let's say we've gone in, we've gone explore on our model. Now we're looking at the data within that model and the structure of that data. So in the browser, this is what we can see. We can see at the top there's navigation menus that let us go through into different entities, because it will default go into the first entity, but you might want to go and modify different data sets. You can go add members, you can go delete members. Now the delete here is twofold. You can soft delete, which means it deletes it, doesn't display it, but it means the code can't be reused. Or you can hard purge the data. That deletes it and allows you to reuse the code. You can use either, it just depends on your business need. Adding, in this case, I should point out, member is the equivalent of adding a row or adding a record. Just MDS refers to a record as a member. Okay. We can also look at rules. We'll talk about rules later. We'll talk about filtering a bit later, and we'll talk about the settings a bit later. And of course, the link to go from one tool into the Excel tool. That same piece of information you can see there. Oh, I do apologize, I should learn to use this mic better. That same piece of information there, that's how it looks in the browser. So everyone's like digested that in, that's great. Same thing in Excel. So in Excel, it adds a little tab called the Master Data tab. In the Master Data tab, we can do the same thing. We can add data, we can delete data, we can modify data. We can also apply the rules, look at the auditing, look at the settings. Much easier to work with your data here. And the reason I wanted to show this one is because if you've got users who are very much attached to Excel, you don't have to like try and sway them to use a whole nother tool, but give you that master data solution benefit of giving you the versioning and the governance. You go, hey, you keep using Excel, that's perfectly fine. Just, I'm going to connect you to MDS to modify your data as opposed to locally on a file system somewhere or on a OneDrive. And you've got the Explorer. Yes?
With the Excel plugin, is there a central way to manage the configuration, what it points to, like your MDS server address? Or?
That's a really good question. So the question was, with the Excel add-in, is there a way to centrally manage the servers that it connects to or the list of environments? To be honest, I've never tried, not that I'm aware of, but if it was the coding tools, I would say yes, but Excel and Office, I'm not across. But I'll look into that one and find out. Once you do add them though, if it helps, once you've added them once, they're there. So when you go add a server, you pick your server, I might say add dev, it's added, I add UAT, it's added, I add prod, it's added, it's there. I load another version of Excel, another instance, it's all there. So I only have to do it the one time on the one machine and then reuse. Cool. And then if you don't want to remember all the different settings, if you're in the browser and you hit open in Excel, it will automatically connect to the one you've just navigated from. It was first. Yes? Does it the question was, does it use an ODBC connection? I am not aware. I'm not sure. I'll find out and get back to you. All right, so let's go have some fun. Let's go create it. This may get a little boring because it'll be a bit of copy-paste, but let's have a look. All right. Switch in. So we're going to use Master Data Services 2017. Well, I should just move this mic. Don't mind me. That's it. Is that better? It's about the same. All right. So is that, do let me know if you can't see it. I will zoom in. Okay. So we're going to go to System Administration because we're doing an administrative task. I'm going to click here when it loads. Hello. We're going to add a new model. So here you see my options are name, description, and log retention. So I'm going to say finance. I don't need a description, but we'll call it Past Summit 2019 Demo. Log retention, the reason I want to point out log retention here is that's that auditing of the who, what, when, and how long it keeps that information for. There are other settings further on, but this is an important one. If you say system setting, it will take the setting from the installation itself, the default, out of the config. If you say yes, you need to specify the number of days. So if anyone has records management requirements within their organization, these are settings you'll want to take into account. So I'm just going to say 365 days, it's a demo. And I'm not going to create an entity with the same name because our example didn't need that. And I save. Ooh. I have another one with security on for another demo. Save. Cool. All right. So now that we've created our model, we're going to jump in and create our entity. So up the top here, we say entities. Make sure, and anytime you navigate through the MDS browser, that the top drop-downs are what you expect them to be. From time to time, they toggle to something you didn't select. So here we're going to add, and we're going to, oh, I forgot to untick that checkbox, the line item detail. And a bit similar to the previous screen, name and description come with everything. But there's the option for a staging table. So you remember right at the start, you saw in the MDS architecture there were staging tables. This is for where you're going to bulk load or batch load into the MDS database behind the scenes if you want to integrate in that way to MDS. Yes?
If you don't add them in the beginning, can you add them later?
The staging tables are added by default. This is just where, the question was, if you don't add staging tables now, can you add them later? They are automatically added regardless. It's just whether you want to specify a different name. The name will take the name of the entity, but if you want to specify your own name, this is where you'll do it. Transaction log type, this is the logging within that entity. So the options are member, attribute, and none. So remember I had at the model level, I said I want to do log retention. Then within the entity, I want to say I'm going to log all the changes for the member. You can do it at the member level, and I think it's like type 2 SCD behind the scenes through to type 4, or you can do it at the attribute level. This is going to track all the attribute changes by selecting member, but it's going to do it for the member record. So any change on an attribute is going to create a new version. So type 2 SCD equivalent. Okay. And in this case, I am going to create the codes automatically and just say 0. And we'll talk about approval at the end. Cool. So let's just rinse and repeat that for the others. Count type. Going to code. Debit credit indicator. Counts type. And save. So you notice now I've created those 4 entities we're going to treat as domain-based. I didn't do anything other than create them, because when I create them, it automatically creates a name and a code for all of them. And I've told it to create the code automatically because I don't have a code value for those. So then the last one we want to do is that sort of catch-all one, the chart of accounts. And within that, we don't need to create the code automatically because that code column we had in our spreadsheet was already unique, and that's where that data is going to go. I want to say save. But then for this one, we need to add additional attributes. So we're going to go into the attributes section, and we're going to add those other 4 domain-based attributes. So notice up the top, the entity drop-down changed. So we're going to change that back to chart of accounts. So we're going to go ahead and add, and this is within the entity. This is where I can add additional attributes other than those out of the box. So I'm going to go ahead and add line item detail. And I can change the display name that I want for that attribute, because I might want the back-end value to be one thing, but the display to be the same thing with spaces. So let's just do an example of that. The display pixel width is the display on the UI by default. It's 100 for everything. You extend it, reduce it. We'll just put 200 for a bit of fun. And this is where we tell it it's domain-based. So we change and say domain-based. Then it's going to ask us which entity those values are coming from. So we'll say line item detail. The filtering allows us, if you've got an entity with multiple different sort of code value data sets that you want to use throughout, but you don't want them in separate entities, you can apply filtering to filter that data. And I'm going to say enable change tracking. That's because I want to know the who, what, when of all my data changes on that field. And we go ahead and repeat that same approach for the other domain-based ones.
You have to set this up in here as opposed to syncing it from your Excel plugin.
So the question was, do you have to set this up through here, or can you do it through the Excel plugin? Through the Excel, great question, Mother. Through the Excel add-in, you can create entities and attributes from that. I find it easier to do it through the browser, as much as it is clicky style. Because if you do it in Excel, you can have, a bit like when you do format as table in Excel, you can say, all right, this data set, create an entity from it. It'll automatically pick its data types and everything for you, but then you have to click on each heading and go attribute, entity property, attribute property, change, and go in and change. And you only do this once. And once you've done this in one environment, there's such things as model packaging and model packaging with data. So you can run a series of commands in the back end on the server to say, take this model, package it up as a bundle, take it to another server and deploy it. And you can do that with data. So you can take your dev environment, package all your model settings and everything up, go to your UAT environment and deploy. Yeah.
But you have to have a developer or enterprise edition run MDS.
Yes.
So if you don't have that in your other environments, just run it in that one environment, or?
You can leverage MDS in multiple, the question was you have to have developer or enterprise edition to run MDS. So if you don't have those versions in your environments, what do you do basically? You can leverage the one MDS across multiple environments. If you don't have firewall boundaries stopping you, you can leverage it. The downside there is you would have to rename your model to use the same MDS and have the model used as like a dev test prod within the same server. Same way if you had a database on SQL Server, you can't call them all finance. You can be like finance dev, finance UAT, finance prod. So you can do it that way. you can leverage. But if your development environment is for development non-production purposes, and you have sort of enterprise agreements or MSDN, you can run enterprise. But yeah, good question. Cool. Count type, change tracking. I'm going to go ahead and add those last two. And we're just going to, the display can stay the same there. It's quite small. Debit credit indicator, enable change tracking, save. And last but not least, chart of accounts type. Cool. And don't worry, if you decide one day, that you want to change those display values, you can come back in later and change the display text. If your organization decides debit credit indicator is now going to be fully spelt, you can just go in and change it. Yes?
What was that change tracking group?
What was the change tracking group? Yes, so I'll just load that up. So right down the bottom here, there's such thing as a change tracking group. To be honest, I don't know all the details off the top of my head, but I'm more than happy to look it up after the session if that's okay. Yeah. But you'll see that throughout. Yes, it is a additional thing within the change tracking, but I don't know all the specifics of them. Control 4. Cool. Great. So now we've gone ahead, we've got our finance model, we've got our 4 domain-based attributes created as entities, and we've got our chart of accounts entity with all the attributes. So if we come back now and we act like our end user who wants to enter data, we're going to select that model. So we pick Finance Summit 2019, and we hit Explore, because Explore is our way of viewing the data, modifying the data, adding the data. So then up the top left, you'll see an entities drop-down that allows you to toggle between the different entities. So if we skip to line item detail, you'll notice it's completely empty, but you'll see the 2 values, name and code. So we can jump in and we can go add member. And then on the far right-hand side, you get the option to enter a name. And the code is grayed out because we said create the code automatically. So I'm going to say cash is my code. And down here, you get these other options. So annotations, the reason we want to look closely at annotations, that's the comment. That's how you achieve the why someone made a change. It's not mandatory though, so put a business process around it or a procedure that says, hey staff, when you make some changes to the data, please enter a nice why. It's a bit like source control commit comments, because that helps you track down why a change was made. It doesn't necessarily provide you the be all or end all though, because you still have the who, the when, and the what, and you can go track the person down and go, why? Go ahead. Yeah?
Where do you see those changes or those comments, those annotations?
We will show you later. So the question was, where do you see these comments, these annotations, and we can show you at the end. So we're going to add new record. And the reason, yes? Yes. Yes, you can. So if you find later on down the track someone didn't add one and you want to add one in, you can. So the question there was, can you add annotations retrospectively? And you can. Cool. So we're just going to create a few values for those different ones. So I'm just going to quickly race through these and add values. And the reason I want to add a value for each of them is to make sure that when we go back to the chart of accounts one, we have values for those drop-downs. So you can see what happens there.
For the code column, can you hide it instead of having grayed out?
Not that. So the question was, can you hide the code column instead of grayed out? Not that I'm aware of. There is not within the detail pane, within that central view pane that you see there. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Sorry. Yes.
Do code values have to be numeric, or can they be anything?
So the question was, do code values have to be numeric or can they be anything? The answer would be, I want to say anything, but I'll caveat that with I'm not sure if like non-ASCII and ASCII's a problem or if special symbols or emojis is okay. But text and numbers definitely works. Yeah. So I have codes within some of the data that I work with where we say have a 3-word name and then we abbreviate that by taking the first letter of each word as the code. So yes, and uppercase, lowercase, both works. So we're going to add. Very good question. The question was, is it case sensitive? I'm not sure. I would have to check. I don't believe so, because it's not a case-sensitive database behind the scenes, but it would be something to test, for sure. Cool. Yeah?
Is it a one at a time? Can you do multiple?
So I'll show you how to do multiple shortly. So the question was, is it a one at a time or is it multiple? In the browser, it is one at a time. In the Excel add-in, it is multiple. And then using the stagey tables, it is like exponentially multiple.
So with the Excel add-in, my organization wrote Office 365.
Yes.
So the Excel add-in isn't available for us because we can't have an individual install the Excel driver.
So the question was around,
How do we deploy that?
yeah. So the state. You're okay. So the statement was around if you have Office 365 and you don't have the option to add add-ins to your Excel, how can you get around that? I am not an Office 365 person. What I am aware of with Office 365 is if you install the information locally, you can manage Excel add-ins and things through group policies and rollouts. So within the organization I currently work in, we do allow the master data services add-in, but not things like macros. We have group policies to block the different extensions. So it would be something you'd want to talk to your either your SOE team or your Office admin team, but you wouldn't be able to use the Office 365 cloud in browser with the on-prem MDS because, yeah, it doesn't know about it. Not that I'm aware of, but that's a very good thing to try. Oh, okay. So this is the last one. This is where we're looking at the chart of accounts. So the name and code here we are going to specify. So I think it's the Cash Woodgrove Bank was my example one. Doesn't matter if I get it wrong. And we'll say 12,001. And now you'll see here, notice how these are drop-down style. So we can go ahead and drop down and we will see the values from the line item detail entity. If the value I want isn't there, I can use the little button on the right to navigate through to that entity, add it in, come back, and then it'll be there. In the same way, I can make sure that my users are picking a value from that list and not just entering free-form text. So this is another way to get that data governance. It does look a bit strange, one second, where you have the name and the code in the little curly braces. So that's what that's displaying, displays the name and the code. The settings little click box you saw earlier, so if I zoom out and zoom back in over this way, this little settings allows you to toggle that display of name and code. So you might want to display code only if you've got financial people who are just used to like cost center coding. They don't want to see the name, they're aware of it. You can do that. You can display the name with the code in brackets or vice versa. Yes, you had a question.
Are the users forced to enter something, or can they leave blank and still insert the member?
They can leave blank and still insert the member because by default, the only thing that's mandatory is code. But we'll talk about how we can enforce data quality a little bit later. Very good question. So the question was, can they leave the values blank? And they can. I'm, of course, going to pick things because I can. Ooh, except for that one, because I didn't populate it. All right, I'm going to say adding a new record. Not good commentary, but it's something is better than nothing. Cool. So now you can see I've got my one record. And as you mentioned earlier, is there a way to do it in bulk? So I'm going to toggle into Excel. And then down the bottom, it's going to ask me, do I want to open this pre-connected Excel file? And the answer will be yes. It's going to pop up with a little pop-up. There it is. So it's going to ask me, do I want to open it with this address? I do. My installation is locally to this computer. Yes, and it'll connect. Then it'll pop up with the Explorer pane and the pre-connected data. Yes, back.
When you do the Open Excel through the web interface, does your Excel have to already have the plugin?
Yes. Yes. If you don't have the plugin though, you would have seen on that first screen of MDS, if we go to the home screen, the little link here. This link is directly to the Microsoft website to download the link. The URL that it links to is actually stored in the backend MDS database. So if that changes, if you change versions or anything within your organization, you can override that so that users click, they get the add-in, they can install it. You possibly need admin to install, but other than that, it's there. Yeah. Good question. So the question was, if you click the link from the browser through to Excel, do you have to have the add-in pre-installed? Yes. So now that I have that data within Excel, I'll zoom in, move that out the way. So now you can see right up the top, I can see where it's connected to. So it'll show me the MDS connection, the model, the entity. And the reason I want to point that out is if you've got users experiencing issues or anything, it's great to know what they're connected to by just getting a screenshot of that, because that will tell you everything you need to know, basically. So from there, this data, I can edit it, I can make a change. So I might want to change this line item detail to a different one. So I can go ahead in and change that. That's going to turn it this lovely salmon pink color to indicate to the user there's a change in a cell. And then I can go ahead and publish that back. So within the master data tab, we have all these different options. One of them is publish. Publish is like save, and it'll pop up and ask you for an annotation. The annotation is not mandatory. If I make multiple changes in this spreadsheet, so I can make, to my heart's content, I can publish them as one change. That will then go through and update all the records, and I can either do one central annotation or I can annotate every single change. So I'm just going to zoom back out, and I'm going to come over to my other spreadsheet and copy some data I already have. Paste it in. Boop. And then we just hit publish. And we'll say adding multiple records. Cool. So for anyone, this is all it says. Yes, at the back.
You mentioned earlier that this is secure, right? Can you do that based on AD group, or is it specific usernames, or how is that?
Sure. So the question was around security that I mentioned earlier. Can you do that around AD groups, or can you do that at users? Both. Both. It is Windows authentication. So if you have AD groups, you can put the AD group in and put the security to the group. You can also put the security to the user, and you can have it inherited and combined. So if I'm in multiple AD groups, it will recognize that and give me the security appropriate. I cannot remember off the top of my head, though, which security it takes if there are conflicting ones. Yes.
So if I gave this spreadsheet to a relatively non-technical user, I would have to teach them to click the publish button, if they click the save button on the spreadsheet, will do something.
Yes. So the question was, if I give this to a Excel newbie to MDS, or someone new to MDS, would they have to be taught how to click publish because they'll automatically think saves their data? The answer would be yes. And the indication point for that would be if the colors of the cells are still that salmon pink color, it indicates there are changes that haven't been published to the server. In the same way, though, you can take that Excel file and have it offline and be working on it. You can be at home doing a few changes, make changes, come back out, and then go back and publish those changes. But you can do refresh as well, which says, okay, tomorrow I come in, I hit refresh, takes the latest version from MDS and brings it down to the spreadsheet. But do be careful, because your users could take that spreadsheet and start sending it around everywhere. It won't be dynamically connected, but what it will do is if a user hits refresh, it makes sure they have access to do the refresh. Can't remember who's first. I think this way, then this one, this way. Yeah.
What happens if two users make simultaneous conflicting edits?
There is the option to merge conflicts at the top here. So that will tell you there's a merge conflict, and you go through and resolve it.
Okay.
Yeah. Just while I've got this screen open, the reason it's got red is because I typed the name differently to what I had in my spreadsheet. So the red indicates a validation error, and if you hover over it, it tells you what that error is. So in this case, the attribute value is not valid. So if someone tries to put data into a column that is a domain-based one and it's not valid, it will tell you that. I believe you had a question before? Okay, good. And was the other question covered off?
Same question, it's just a question of how it would handle if you have 2 or 3 users all making changes to the same data point at the same time.
Yeah, it will.
But it's going to have to basically know that data user, it was X, now user 1 wants to be Y, user 2 wants to be Z, so now you're going to have to be able to compare against that.
It will do it will indicate, so the question is around if you have multiple users making parallel changes to the data, how does it know who's who, when, what's up? A bit like a database change. If you take a read of data and try and change it and it's already been changed on you, it will indicate merge conflict, you've got different changes. But one thing we'll cover off a bit later is the concept of a change set and an approval process, which will try and help you tag those change sets to be one after the other. Yeah.
Are those entities and attributes, you can see it in your SQL Management Studio?
The entities and attributes, can you see them in SQL Management Studio? Yes, and I will show you that a bit later. It is a bit obfuscated because, of course, they don't want that information to be shown to the users by default, a bit like CRM Dynamics, but it is accessible. Yes, but all the database is managed through the application. So any change you want to make to the underlying database, you do via the application. Yeah. You can, of course, modify it, but I would tread with care. It is a proprietary product with a solution database behind it. So if you modify it in such a way that you break it, Microsoft possibly won't support you.
Is that the same as CRM?
So the question is it the same as CRM? If I'm a DBA and I go into the backend database of MDS because it is SQL Server database, can I just make changes? On a technical level, you can. On a supportability, licensing support from Microsoft, you may want to check your terms and conditions. But I have seen people do it quite successfully and not break the underlying structure. But also remember in your upgrade path that any additions or modifications you make to that behind-the-scenes database, you upgrade the product, you make sure A, your upgrade works, but B, that you reintroduce any change you made if you need it going forward. Cool. All right. I just had to correct a few data entry errors there. And you can see on that far left-hand side, we've got a validation status within Excel. So what I didn't show you is within the web browser version, if I'm exploring that data, when I added data, for those of you who are key visual people, you'll notice on the far left column there was a little question mark when I added new data, and then miraculously it changed to a tick box. The little question mark is indicating that business rules and validation hasn't been applied, but as soon as the tick is there, it indicates that validation has been applied and is successful. If it's an exclamation mark in a red, it's invalid change. And it'll give you the details of that change. So there's the two ways it displays it. The UI will give you the little icon. Excel will give you extra columns that tell you, no, validation, unsuccessful, change data, and then when you hover over the cell, it tells you the why. Cool. Yes?
So when you publish your changes, is there a setting that you can send the notification to your stakeholders saying the data is changed?
Sure. So the question was around if you, when you publish your changes, is there a way to send email notifications out to your stakeholders that data has changed? There is email notification functionality within the MDS solution. I'm not going to cover it today. The level to which those notifications apply, I would have to double check. But yes, there is the capability to do email notifications from MDS. The level to which they apply, I'd have to check. Yeah. Excellent question. Cool, so now you can see that that data I added in Excel was added through Excel, published up, and then we skip back to the browser and I can see my data is there as well. And this is where things like the filter option in the browser are important because the data set is paginated. So if you have hundreds of thousands of rows of data and the visualization is paginated, you might want to use filter to go through and go, you know what, I only want to look at everything that starts with A because I'm trying to adjust an accounts receivable record. Yes, at the back. Did you have a question? Yeah, it keeps the connection. So this, the one that I copy-pasted from was one I created yesterday, and it keeps the connection up the top. So if I go to master data, I can go through and refresh and publish. So it'll keep the connection there. It doesn't keep it live and active, but it does keep it as a sort of metadata information within the file.
So all you have to do is just hit refresh.
Presuming you have connectivity to the environment, yes. Yep. So that's where you've got business users who love their Excel. You just tell them, come in for the day, hit refresh, save on your computer, work away, and then publish. That's why it's good to have that Excel interface because there are some die-hard Excel users. Power to them, because that's okay. Yes?
Do you happen to know if this file is publishable to a Power BI report server on-prem?
So the question was, is the Excel file publishable to a Power BI report server on-prem? I would have to double check, but it is a standard Excel file, so you could probably publish it, but I don't think it would take any of the connections at all, and it would probably error because that top line is actually in one cell. So your first row, your column header row, is just that one cell. So it's not going to take it as a proper cell. But I'm a small bit familiar with the Excel in Power BI report server, but not sufficiently to know how it's going to handle this specific file. Yeah. But Data Clinic.
We're trying to cut down on the number of Excel files we're sharing around.
You can certainly put an Excel file onto Power BI, but I wouldn't put But I wouldn't put an Excel file that is connected to MDS onto a Power BI report server, and the main reason is it takes you down the path of a data leak because you're effectively taking away the security you applied on that data and publishing it through a source. That's different. But yes, as people pointed out, subscription views, which we'll talk about later, will allow you to integrate Power BI reporting or SSRS reporting or just Excel reporting into the data set that you're working with in MDS. That's your integration point. It's really good. Mm-hmm. You're all jumping ahead, but this is great. We'll cover it a bit later. We will cover integrating into existing solutions at a really high level at the end, so I'm more than happy to talk to it more later. But that's great that you're seeing how you can take this data and use it in your organization. So keep it going. So did everyone hear that question, by the way? It was how you would integrate this into SSIS. Cool. So let's go back here. Let's go back to our slides. Where did I put my clicker? Mm-hmm. I put it down somewhere, and I don't know where. Under my phone. Okay, I lost the clicker. So now we've gone through and we've added that Excel data set that you see here into MDS. Now the fun part is this is what it looked like in Excel. Same data set in MDS. So we'll just toggle back, toggle forward. Pretty much the same, right? But now I've got something that's versioned, that's governed, that can be shared, that can be repeatedly connected to, that can be scaled. I get all these extra benefits, as long as I have enterprise, but I get all these extra benefits that I can use. So the one thing that we talked about earlier is, can you hide the code field? I wouldn't hide the code field myself, but it's possible that you might want to, but there is a concept of a thing called attribute groups. And attribute groups allows you to change on the browser UI the attributes that are visible to a user at any point in time. So by default, it shows all attributes. And you can see here the one in bold inside the square brackets is where I've created an attribute group called account type settings and said for that, when someone clicks that, I only want them to see the two attribute account type columns. So they're not seeing everything all the time. So if you've got specific staff who only manage some of the attributes but not all of them, or there's common business tasks you do, you can create attribute groups to give them a more user-friendly experience in the browser.
And then are those attribute groups durable? Like, can you, like from a role standpoint, can you say, okay, this person is able to look at this attribute group?
So the question was, are those attribute groups secureable? Can you make it so that certain people can see certain attributes? The security model behind the scenes is not it doesn't touch the attribute groups per se, but within the security model, you can have security at the model, at the entity, at the attribute, and at the individual attribute. And you can say read, update, create, and delete, and admin. So effectively, if you had a user that only had read to some attributes, but not all, that would be the way I would look at it. Yeah.
So it looks at that one first and then applies the attribute group on top of it.
They will still see the attribute group hyperlinks as far as I'm aware, because those are like links within the UI. But when they would click them, it wouldn't do anything. But I would have to double check. But you can apply security around your attributes. So let's look at attribute group history, and we may have to rush through the rest of this. Let's look at data quality. So data quality is something, now that we've got our data in MDS, that's great. But there's two data quality things, that functionality features that we can look at. One is approvals, and the other one is business rules. So approvals gives us a way to make sure that any changes on an entity are approved. You can only do it if you have 2 people or more, because you cannot approve your own changes, even if you're an admin. Not like sysadmin or all in databases. So that's that. To use that, you use a thing called change sets. So a change set says make changes to the data, as many changes you like, adding members, changing attributes. Put that into a change set, send the change set for approval. Until it is approved, no one else sees the change to the data. It's sort of in the backlog of changes. Once it's approved, it gets applied to the data, and everyone else that has access to it can see that data change. The other thing is business rules. That's where we can make things mandatory required, or we can do things like defaulting a field. So I was going to demo this, but I think I'm just going to skip and do the slides. I can demo it a bit later. So we'll have a look at approval. So with an approval, a user, one, goes and creates a change set. So this screenshot is from the bottom right-hand side. Within an entity, you had the details pane. Underneath that, the little annotation pane. Right below that is change set. So you can go ahead and create a change set there. That creates an open change set. Go make changes throughout the entity, as many as you like. They're going to get applied to the change set. Once they're applied, go back to the change set and say submit. That then says, okay, make a change, select the change set. Change appears in yellow as opposed to the salmon pink color. Yellow indicates the value you've changed. Of course, your screen will be like multiple yellow if you've got extra. We then go add it to the change set, submit for approval. Then we have user 2, who's one of the other admins of this entity, so they can go and approve a change set. They review the same section of the UI. They'll see a change set that's pending approval. They go ahead, review it, approve or reject. So they get the little hyperlinks in blue above. They go approve it, and then the data change is now applied so that all users can see it. So if I was user 1 and I go back and hit refresh, it'll go from yellow to now an applied data change.
Basically a pull request.
Yes. So the statement there was basically a pull request. So if anyone uses Git and source control, pull request. But yes, you can revert the change. You can reject the change set in its entirety. You can also, as an approver, you can say apply the data change, which will effectively take all the changes within the change set, apply them on your screen so you can see all the different yellows, so you can quick do a review. Then you can unapply and make it.
A question.
Yes.
Does the change set lock the data in some way? Because it's a possibility that anyone can change the data once you have the pending change set.
So the question was, does the change set lock the data? To be honest, I don't know the correct terminology that would apply here. It does essentially mean that if you make a change set, the change sets after it are incremental. But exactly whether it doesn't lock it from the perspective of users can still read the data and view the data.
No, it should
Yeah.
be able to read it, but
Yeah.
maybe not write the data.
I think you can.
I
I think you can still make a change. It would be something we'd have to try out. Very good question, though. Sorry, I don't know the answer to that one. Yes. I got to race through.
If you got one change set pending approval, and a user makes another change set, what happens to that data? Because what they changed may have been already changed by the previous one that hadn't been approved yet.
Sure. So the question was, if a user makes a change and puts it in a change set, and then that submits that one, and another user makes another change set with changes to the same area of data, what happens to that set? Similar questions. I don't know exactly off the top of my head, but if you want to pop by afterwards, we can test it out. I have a setup with 2 users, so we can go try it. Yeah. So the other one was creating a business rule. So what I forgot to mention with approvals is you have to say an entity requires approval. So when I created the entities earlier, I did not indicate they require approval. So if you do want the approval workflow, make sure you go back to the administration and enable that. It will warn you that you need to have 2 users, and one has to be, the second of the 2 has to be an admin in the security roles. So we look at creating a business rule. Business rule is also an administrative function. So when you're looking at the entities, you can select create business rule on those. So if you navigate to the entity, select create business rules, select add. This is the screen that you'll be greeted with. It is kind of like a if this then that type approach. So you can say if this attribute equates to this, then take this action. In the example of these slides, we're going to do a required field. So we only put a then action. So on the next screen here, you'll see it does a then action. These are all the different things we can apply. I don't know if that's zoomed enough. If it's not zoomed enough, let me know. I'll zoom in the tooling. But effectively, if I wanted to do a required field, I would select the attribute, select the action of required, and then hit save. That's going to go ahead and create the business rule. It is not going to apply it as an active rule. It's going to apply it as a pending. You then need to publish that, which makes it an active rule. What that does is when we had adding data, modifying data, and we had the little question mark, when the rules are run, it's going to go through and apply this rule to the data as well. And you can retrospectively apply it to all the existing data you had by selecting the Apply Rules option in both Excel and in the browser. Cool. We may have to race through the end. So the other thing we're going to talk about is the governance benefits. So you saw basically with the change tracking, with the approvals, I can see that people have made changes. I can see those changes, but how do I go about seeing what they made, when they made it, and who made it? Because all those changes we've been making with the change tracking enabled, we have that information, but how do I go see it? And then the why, the reason I wrote optional, annotation not mandatory, that would be how you'd find out the why. Unless you correlate date and who to a business process and go, okay, it's fiscal year, finance are doing a review. Cool. So let's jump in and have a look at audit tracking. I do want to show this one in the tool because there are like 3 different places where you can see it. So we come in. We'll go to the browser first. We go to the Explorer, and we start there. So we've got our model selected here. We go to Explorer. Then you'll see up the top, the first thing I want to do, when I scroll across, there is nothing about who created this, when they created it, and who updated it, and when they updated it. So the first thing I want to do is go to Settings and toggle on the Show System Attributes option. This option. And then we're going to hit OK. And then I'm going to scroll to the right, and now I can see here that I can suddenly see who created all these entities, when they were last updated, and at what time. Yeah. Pretty handy. Good start. Now if I hit this View History, this is going to give me the history of all changes to that entity over the time period. So if I do that, I've only got the one change. Yeah, pretty simple. And then you toggle back with View Master Data. The other thing that this particular screen lets you do is revert a change. If someone made a change incorrectly, you can select that and say revert, and it's going to undo the changes they did. There is a way to also do where it's a soft delete to undo the discard and bring the data back. Cool. So we're going to hit View Master Data to toggle back. So I'm just going to quickly make a change so we can see some history. So we'll say updating line item. And hit OK. And we're going to do one more for just, because more is better. Okay. So the other option of View History now is if we select a particular entity member, and on the right-hand side, there's the View History option. So if we select that, we're going to see now in lovely yellow all the different changes. Not only that, we're going to see them in order, and we're going to see on the right-hand side who made the change and when. And then if we click one, I'm going to zoom out. Notice down the bottom you can see my annotations. So someone asked earlier, how do I see those annotations? This is how. And it does look a bit odd because you're looking at it going, why does the last record look like the current record? It is a bit like slowly changing dimension type 2. So you'll notice on the right-hand side, the updated on is like a way future distance value because it's the current record. If I go ahead and make another change, that's going to end. It's going to create a new record with the updated attribute changes because I've set a member level log transaction. Yeah, cool. And that same information is available in Excel. So in Excel, I can look at the same data. I'll just do a quick refresh. Now I believe I selected the first one. So up the top, you can say show audit information, which is how I get those extra columns. And I'll just expand them. You need to change the formatting on the date ones to show the time, but it is there up the top. And then that gives me the who, what, and why. And if I select View History, I'll see the same thing. Or not for that one. Which one did I pick? Balance sheet on 12,001. Okay. 12,001, the bottom one. There we go. View history. Slightly different display, not as user-friendly in my opinion, but still another way to see the data. So if you're working with the data in Excel and you're going, that's not right, I didn't do that, who made the change? You can come in and have a look. And it does show the history, but I will point out on my particular environment, it's all blank. There's a problem with my Excel at the moment. It should show the same as the browser, and does usually. It's just my particular computer at the moment. So I'm not losing data, it is there. It's just not there. Okay, cool. So let's jump back. Cool. So the super fast recap of audit tracking. So again, we can go through, we can select the entity we want to view the history on. Under the details pane, we select view history. Shows us the data changes over time, highlighted in yellow, so it's easy to find out the different cell changes, and the annotations down the bottom. So how can we integrate that with existing solutions? When you want to do integrations, there's two different ways. The first one is subscription views. The reason you want to do subscription views is when you want to egress or extract the data out, or you just want to query it and view it for reporting purposes. MDS is still an operational transactional system behind the scenes, so you could do operational reporting off it. A subscription view, when you create it, it's simply a T-SQL view behind the scenes. So if I go here and I go into administrative management and I select integration management, you have to be an admin to do that. I will get this screen. I then select add. I pick the entity that I want to view on. It is at the entity level. So if I want to view on every entity I've created, you have to go create it for every entity. So in this case, I've created one called product members. It's off the product model and it's off the product entity. And then behind the scenes in the database, this is what it's doing. It's creating a view in the MDM schema. That view not only contains my data and the columns that I name them, if I have domain-based attributes, it's also going to include their name and code columns in that view, and it's going to include the system attributes as well. So I can see the who and the why, the who and the when, as well as the what. So if we go ahead and query that view, and apologies, this is all like light-themed screenshots. If I query that view, you can see that the name and code column at the far right-hand side, those are the name and code columns that I would see on the UI. And everything else is like the internal metadata fields. Oh, cool. So if I wanted to do a sys solution to pull out this data to integrate with other systems, I would take the data from the subscription views and leverage that out. If you want to make a change to the view, change it through the application because they are application managed views, even though they are the views behind the scenes. In the same way, that's how I get data out to leverage. And you can three-part name if you're on the same database, server, or instance. So that's why this one has three-part naming. The other option is getting data in. I can batch load that data. So I can take data from any source that I'm using, batch load it into the staging tables behind the scenes. Then there's a stored procedure you execute, which basically validates and processes that data through to the entity itself. If there are any errors, it will give you status code errors for that. And there's great blog posts online that go through all the different error codes. Yeah, cool. So I'm not going to go through that one because we're short on time. But there is a link there. The link takes you through, it's a walkthrough of how to do staging. So because there is the concept of if you're loading domain-based and then leveraging them, you've got to load sort of in the orders and then how you batch load, how you run the store procs behind the scenes, and then what that looks like. So cool. Yes?
So this whole process can be automated, right?
The batch loading? Yeah. And so the question was, can you automate that whole batch loading process? Yeah. I think there's a Codeplex SSIS solution where people have actually taken sort of file-based, load it into staging, process it, loop through the results. And then the only thing it can't do, of course, is handle the errors. So if you have a status of a validation error, it can't handle that for you. You have to go in and go, all right, this data didn't load, why? Yeah. But you can see all those errors just by querying the underlying tables. Cool. Yes, question?
If you create an entity and then subsequently realize that you forgot to add a column, an attribute, and then add it after the fact in MDS, will it backfill and populate the values of that column automatically, or do you have to do something special?
So the question was, if you go ahead and create an entity and you've forgotten to add an attribute, can you go back and add that attribute later? And will it default the column with values, or do you have to back populate them? You would have to back populate them is the answer. You can go ahead and add an attribute after the fact, but remember at the start there are no defaults on any of those attributes except for code where it has to have a value or it has to be defined. So if you add one later on, you have to go populate it.
And so, is that clear how to do that? Is there documentation on how to backfill and populate?
Well, in
Like,
terms...
you have millions of rows and you add an attribute.
So it would be like running an alter table add column statement minus the with check constraint add default, but it would be like that where you add a column into your table in your database, then you just need to insert the data in. So if I was doing it through Excel, I can add the column through the administrative tools and then in Excel just paste the values in because it's only going to apply it to the current version and then future. So it's not going to back populate all the versions if that's what you're asking. So I'm going to go through and go, you added this data. Now a week later, you've added an extra column. Go update every previous version of this data with the column. It won't do that. It sort of goes from that point in time forward. There is versioning functionality. I didn't cover it off today that allows you to lock an entity to a version so you can view data at a version and go that way, but not that specific back populate history. Cool. Yeah. The one thing to be aware of, if you do batch load, it bypasses approval workflows. Yeah. So if you have an approval workflow and you batch load that data, it just skips it. Cool. Yes, you had a question?
Assuming that the batch load will update existing records if the codes match, can you use that to only update certain attributes and leave the rest blank, or do you have to provide the entire row?
Sure. So the question was, if you do batch loading, assuming that it matches on the code value, because that's how it knows, do you have to provide changes to every attribute or just the attribute you want to change? I believe, if I remember correctly, it is you can just change the attribute you want to change.
Yeah, it should.
Yeah, it was a key value pair style. So you say this attribute is this value. So if you don't provide updates to the other ones, if I remember rightly, I haven't done this for a little while.
As long as it's not mandatory attributes.
Yes. Yeah.
If
Yes.
it's in nulls, it ignores as well. So if you have other fields.
Are you saying it does or will it?
It will.
Okay. So the statement was, if you send it nulls, basically what we'll do with it, it will apply them. That would be interesting because I would guess there is a way to add the textual value null though, as opposed to the DB null value. Yeah. Yeah, so you could have a lovely null column with actual text of null, as opposed to blank. Yeah, if you stage it with DB null, yeah. Great, cool. So of course, a lot of the stuff we've gone through today is available online. So I wanted to include a couple of references that I thought will be handy for you all. So that first architectural diagram was available from the Redgate Simple Talk website. They have a really great run through of the MDS product. The EDX course in the middle is by a fellow Aussie called Peter Myers. And that's a really good starting point for if you're learning MDS, and it covers the administration, how you create models and entities, and takes you through it in a bit more depth. And it is self-paced, so you can do it at your own pace. And then, of course, Reza Rad from Radicad Consulting has a great blog on the change set and workflow approvals, which was introduced in 2016. So if you are using an earlier version, it's not there. Cool. Any more questions? Yes.
Any considerations we need to be aware of in terms of performance when you have large amounts of data?
So are there any, the question was, are there any considerations in terms of performance when you have large amounts of data? And I'm going to guess large could be anything like a couple of million or something. Yes, there is the concept of indexing, and in lower versions of SQL Server and MDS, I think it might have been like 2012, there was some problems with speed and performance. Look at your batch sizes when you're doing batch loading. Don't try and do your entire 1 million data set, there is a recommended batch size level that is available online. Look to apply that so that you're doing a batch of that size, processing it right through to the entity, and then loading the next batch. Same way if you're going to do things in Excel, Excel itself has limitations. I think if you're running 32-bit, it's within 4 gig of memory of data and 32 million rows or something to that extent. So don't try and do massive amounts of changes in Excel because you'll hit Excel's limitations before you'll hit MDS's. But yes. Yep, sorry.
Do you know what Microsoft's roadmap for MDS is? It doesn't seem like they've been investing in it very heavily.
So the question was, do I know what the roadmap is for Microsoft's MDS? Because there haven't seemed to be many changes recently. Short answer, no. Not that I'm aware of. I don't know the roadmap. Do you know the roadmap?
Well, actually, I have the same question because there's really
Sure.
not a lot of upgrades, but actually Microsoft has pushed our company towards a
Prophecy?
it's called Prophecy.
Yeah. So the statement there was, they asked the gentleman asked a similar question of some Microsoft people, and they were directed towards Prophecy. Prophecy is another company that do master data management. There is another one as well. And I believe Prophecy are doing a cloud-based version as well. Prophecy have great training. They're another company. Effectively, between 2008 and 2019, MDS is there. If it does get deprecated, you can still get to that data and pull it out. So that's the one benefit that you've got there is if Microsoft choose to not have that master data services, master data management solution there, it's not like you don't have a way to get it out, get the data out and data in. Some people build bespoke master data management solutions because under the hood, it's version managing of data. So we do that all the time with warehouses. This is just doing it with a user entry, user UI on top. So previously people would have done like light switch on top of Excel and that sort of thing. So you can roll your own if you're not using all the functionality. Then yeah. Sorry, yes. We're over time, but. So the question was, are there any APIs? Yes, because it's got WCF services and REST services. So yes, you can do API integration. Yeah. Sorry, one last question.
So is MDS a good solution if you want to say, for instance, I have an HR application and I need, somebody's added to the HR and I need to feed that data into accounting and into timekeeping and a few other places. I mean, it seems like everything you did here was through an Excel spreadsheet, but if you need to trigger data like that, is this a good way to go, or is it Prophecy maybe a better solution or something like that?
So the question was, if I have like a HR system where I'm managing data and I want to take that data from HR and then transfer that into my finance system and other systems, is MDS a good solution for that? Is like a Prophecy a good solution for that? Prophecy and MDS, Prophecy is a company. I think their product's called Maestro, if I remember. Both of them are master data management solutions. So at the end of the day, it comes down to your cost-benefit analysis and return on investment for your company and your business needs. In terms of managing that data, MDS is definitely a candidate for it if you need human intervention between. Because if you don't need a human to manipulate or centrally manage that data between your HR system and your other systems, then you could just use an ETL framework to take your data from one and multicast it to the others. But if you need, say, HR data to come in and then another team add or modify the data before it gets to another system, then an MDS solution in between is great. Yeah, because it gives you that consistent feed, but managed.
We just want to automate the feed, but we want to, right now we have a bunch of crappy old SQL routines that are doing those as jobs, and we want to get away from that and get a more manageable solution.
Yeah. So in that case, only use MDS if you need a human intervention between. If you don't, you can just automate it with various ETL frameworks, whichever one suits your team the best. Because MDS would then create an extra layer of governance on top. Whereas if you don't need human intervention, your only versioning that you need, you can manage with like temporal tables in SQL. You could have all the data come in, stage it, temporal table on it to create your history, and then have that pushed out to the various systems after that. So you still got your history, you still know when it changed because you can set that up in your ETL frameworks, and then just have it multicasted out. Because if you put MDS there, yeah, it's giving you all these things, but you're not using them, so it doesn't make sense. Yeah, cool. Well, I move for time.
So from the user perspective, if you have a lot of models and intents on MDS, right? What is the best practice for them usually find the data?
So the question was, if you have a lot of models and entities and you have users working with those, how would they find their data? That really comes down to, I think, your business process around how you're using the tool and how you navigate and how you manage your metadata management. Because at the end of the day, it's just a tool. It doesn't have a search capability so that you can go to that UI and go search for data XYZ. It already assumes that you know what area you're looking at. So I would be putting it as a business process.
So you can actually group different data into different places for them to access?
Yeah, when you're doing that early on, the design, so we took it and we said, we're going to have this model with these entities, but you can change that structure to suit. So I could say, well, I'm going to have multiple entities, I'm going to put them all in the one model, or I could say a model is going to represent a business organizational area or a functionality area. Yeah, cool.
Is there some wizard that can like build model based on existing data?
So the question was, is there some wizard that can create your model based on existing data? The wizard would be your IT team or your business intelligence person. Not in that sense. There's not like an AI style wizard that says, oh, I've done some analysis and I see here you might have domain-based. Not that I'm aware of.
For example, I have some table or tables or database, yeah, and then I click some button, okay, build model based on this table.
Well, you could go into Excel and take your data, have it in Excel and say create entity, and it'll just go create it. But what it won't do then is make sure the data typing and those input masks are what you think it should be.
Only Excel or normal SQL database?
For doing it with the SQL database behind the scenes, you would have to use like the stored procs and play with it that way.
Via interface, it's not possible just to select a normal table as a data source.
Not in that sense, because you're taking the data and you're moving it from being managed in like a table and making it managed through MDS. It in turn creates a table behind the scenes. It's called like TBL1 through like however many you have. But it's not, you can't just go to a SQL Server database table and go, hey, transfer that over to MDS and manage it there. It does require some intervention to say, look, this is my data that I want. This is the MDS solution I want. Now I have to, as a team, we have to figure out how we're moving that data from one to the other, whether that's through Excel, through the browser, or through the REST services behind the scenes. It still means you have to do it. But you're only doing it once, the first shift, and then integrating it back.
So it's mostly a solution for Excel files, yeah, we can say.
No, it's not necessary. So the question was, the statement was, is it the solution only for Excel files? No. It's for master data management in general. So if your master data is currently managed through a table, thanks very much, and you have, say, a DBA going in and adding rows and modifying rows, you're shifting that master data management from wherever it is currently, or if it doesn't exist, into MDS. So let's say I have my ETL job schedule is sitting inside a SQL Server table. And when I want to add schedules to that, which it's not, it's actually through Add Your Jobs, but when I want to add to that, I might have to go to my fellow dev and go, hey, can you add a schedule daily 5 minutes to this table? Because that's where the config comes from. It means I have to have a developer involved, someone with database knowledge, someone with database access. I can't then go to my business user and say, oh, if you need a new schedule, you can just add it. But what I can do is say, that's master data that I want managed by more people than just my development staff. So I'm going to take that data and I'm going to use an MDS solution to store it and manage it. Then I'm going to give access to my business customer and say, you can now modify that master data. But then behind the scenes, the developers can be pulling it out and using it in their solutions. So it's not necessarily a solution for Excel. It's a solution for any master data management. So anything that you want to conform, centralize, consolidate, that's where it comes in.